All right, good people. We are here. Good people, we are here for another Bible study. It is time to jump into it. We're going to go right into it because tonight we're talking about Abraham's legacy. About 2 weeks ago, we discussed Sarah's legacy and how all of the things in her life. And tonight's chapter is really all about Abraham and his lineage. So I love me a good family tree, and we are going to get into the nitty gritty of what that family tree is, what it explains to us in Genesis 25. So let me share my screen, and of course, per usual, we are going to read all the way through the chapter. Then we're going to take another gander at it in a PowerPoint. So let's read straight through the chapter. We're going to read an NLT version, and that is going to help us to understand kind of some things that we're reading for this evening and what we need to break down. So let's get started. Let me make sure that my what I'm sharing is correct. Let's see. All right, here we go. Now we can share. All right, so we are in Genesis 25, and it starts off with the death of Abraham. And it says, Abraham married another wife whose name was Keturah. She gave birth to Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. Jokshan was the father of Sheba and Dedan. Dedan's descendants were the Asherites, Hatushites, Lemuites. Midian's sons were Epher, Hanak, Abida, and Eldah. These were all the descendants of Abraham through Keturah. Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Isaac, but before he died, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them off to a land in the east, away from Isaac. Abraham lived for 175 years, and he died at a ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying life. He breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. His sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. This was the field Abraham had purchased from the Hittites and where he had buried his wife Sarah. After Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who settled near Beer Lahai in the Negev. This is the account of the family of Ishmael, the son of Abraham through Hagar, Sarah's Egyptian servant. Here is a list by their names and clans of Ishmael's descendants. The oldest was Nebaioth, followed by Kedar, Abdeel, Mipsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jatur, Naphish, and Kadima. These 12 sons of Ishmael became the founders of 12 tribes named after them, listed according to the places they settled and camped. Ishmael lived for 137 years. Then he breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. Ishmael's descendants occupied the region from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt in the direction of Ashur. There they lived in open hostility toward all their relatives. The births of Esau and Jacob. This is the account of the family of Isaac, the son of Abraham. When Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel the Aramean from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban the Aramean. Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So she went to ask the Lord about it. Why is this happening to me? She asked. And the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. From the very beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. And when the time came to give birth, Rebekah discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat, so they named him Esau. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel, so they named him Jacob. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. As the boys grew up, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebekah loved Jacob. One day, when Jacob was cooking some stew, Esau arrived home from the wilderness exhausted and hungry. Esau said to Jacob, "I'm starved. Give me some of that red stew." This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. "All right," Jacob replied, "but trade me your rights as the firstborn son." "Look, I'm dying of starvation," said Esau. "What good is my birthright to me now?" But Jacob said, "First you must swear that your birthright is mine." So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. He showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. Wow, that was nice and long. And so now we are going to jump over into our PowerPoints, and that is going to take us into our understanding and our breakdown of this chapter, of course. So tonight we are talking about Abraham's legacy. And when you think of a legacy, you're thinking of like what gets passed on, what endures time is the way that I think of it. Beyond my life, what endures time? So let's find out how Abraham's legacy plays out. First, we start off the top by telling y'all that Abraham got married to another wife. So if you recall, Sarah died when she was 127 years old. She birthed Isaac when she was 90 years old. So she lived another almost 40 years before she passed. So Isaac would have been almost that age, almost 40 when she passed. Abraham would have been about 137 years old at the time. But he doesn't die until much later, and so he remarries. That is perfectly fine for somebody to remarry after their spouse has passed away. This is a man, he needs somebody to help take care of him and what he has going on. So he married Keturah. I'm sure she was much younger. We can get over it. She gave birth. So it's telling them, okay, he married another wife. We know about Ishmael. We know about Isaac. We know about Hagar, who was the mother of Ishmael. We know about Sarah, who was the mother of Isaac. But now we're learning about Keturah. Okay, so she has a whole family. So she gave birth through Abraham, Zimran, Jokshan, Medan, Midian, Ishbak, and Shua. 6 sons. So I highlighted the ones that you probably need to pay attention to. Some of them will come up in later chapters, but because it mentions these names in lower verses, then we can follow the name. So that generation, 2 of those children gave birth to other children, at least that are written about in the record. So Jokshan, it says in verse 3, was the father of Sheba and Dedan. Then it tells us who was Dedan's lineage. Dedan's descendants were the Asherites, the Tushites, and Lemuites. The other son, Midian, his sons were Ephah, Epher, Hanak, Abida, and Eldah. So that tells us that Jokshan and Midian's sons were of some importance, at least when it comes to, where they lived in that region, because it's mentioning them in this verse, which means that when this account was written, these were probably important people for the people of that time period to know of, because they were probably places that were in that region, or at least stories that they would have heard of or referenced. So when Moses was writing Genesis, these people become important in this lineage. So this is Keturah. Remember her sons. These are her sons and their lineage. So now it says these were all descendants of Abraham through Keturah. So it's very important for us to understand that Abraham had a whole nother family outside of Isaac, and they were descendants of Abraham. So When we sing the song of Father Abraham has many sons and many sons has Father Abraham, this is what we're talking about. He did have many sons. He had, what is this, 8 in total, because if you count Ishmael and Isaac and plus this 6, that means it's 8 sons. So these were all descendants of Abraham. So this whole region is full of Abraham's descendants. So let's look at that in a visual. This is Abraham. He was married to Sarah. Sarah dies. But of course, before then, we know that they had Isaac. Isaac eventually marries Rebecca, and we'll see that how that we saw how that played out last week in the chapter where it explained how that arranged marriage took place. But before that, Hagar was on the scene because she was Sarah's servant when they were much younger. We know that Abraham had been promised a son, and Sarah was not getting pregnant, and so Sarah offered her servant Hagar to agree to have a child for her, for Abraham. So that child was Ishmael. So Ishmael is a product of Hagar, and Sarah, really, because that was their agreement. So Ishmael comes into play. Then later on, about 15 years maybe later, was Isaac. After Sarah died, Abraham remarries. We know nothing else about Hagar. He tells us nothing else about her. To assume she was still living because she was quite young when she was the mother of Ishmael. But Abraham married Keturah. Keturah has these 6 sons. And based on what it tells us in this verse 3 and 4, these are the descendants of these sons. So Jokshan, Dedan, and Sheba. I'm sure there were other children that they had, but these were the ones that were important to mention for reasons, for historical purposes. And then Midian had sons. I should have put this. I put it on the wrong level. I should have moved that around. But essentially, these 5 boys should have been here, where it's coming down from Midian. So that's how that works. All right. We've got 3 generations starting with Abraham, and then his sons, and then their sons. Then it says in verse 5 that Abraham gave everything he owned to his son Isaac. But before he died, he gave gifts to the sons of his concubines and sent them off to a land in the east away from Isaac. This is very interesting, and we need to understand what this means. Isaac got everything that was owned by Abraham because Isaac has the legal and spiritual, like birthright and blessing, legal birthright, spiritual blessing. So all of the household of Abraham, if you will, because we know that Abraham was vastly wealthy. We know that he had servants. We know that he had people who were working for him. They dug wells. They did lots of things. They cared for his animals. He had lots and lots of animals. He had lots of gold and silver. We know that Abraham was so rich that when he sent his servant to go look for a wife for Isaac, he sent a whole caravan of camels and other servants who went and accompanied them to Haran. And Rebecca was the one who got the water for them at the well. And the gift that he gave her for getting the water was 2 gold bracelets and a nose ring. You don't just give out jewelry, gold jewelry, willy-nilly. So we know that he was strategically wealthy, and all of that got passed to Isaac. And we can confirm that from the promise that God gave him before. Because when Abraham tried to give the promise to Ishmael, God was like, no, I have Isaac. He will be the son of the promise. So that means the other children that existed on Keturah's side, as well as Hagar, they would not receive the same blessing that Isaac would get. Now that could cause problems. So before he died, that could cause, jealousy. What Abraham did is he gave gifts. So he gave, we don't know what type of gifts, but we can assume that it was probably plenty that he gave to the sons of his concubines. So this is going to refer, I'm going to, infer with the text that he was married to Keturah. So that is a wife. A wife and a concubine are not the same thing. So there may have been other children who existed through the concubines, but his descendants are these children. These are Abraham's descendants. So he sent them far off to a land in the east away from Isaac. So essentially, everybody who was not receiving the blessing, Isaac, would have been sent east of where they were. So they would have been over here, where it's like this is like present day Gaza. They would have been over here. They would have been sent out to the east, away from Isaac. Isaac will inherit this whole territory, even though it's not even Abraham's right now. We know that eventually Isaac gets the territory of, well, not Isaac, but his sons his son, sorry, gets the territory between the Mediterranean Sea and the Euphrates. This is the Mediterranean Sea. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers are over here going towards Iraq. So everybody else would be east of that. And that is going to be the case. We're going to come back to it, but you can even see how Midian is here. Dedan is here. Sheba is down here in the south of the Arabian Peninsula. So you can even see from just this map alone how many lands were occupied by the sons of Abraham. See how we have Midian, we have Dedan, we have Sheba. So all of that land would have been occupied by the correct person. So that's proving the text. This is how we understand the text with like historical records. It says to the east, so we go look to the east. Okay, to the east of Israel, which becomes the inheritance later on through Jacob. We see that these clans existed, these people groups existed. So verse 7 says, Abraham lived for 175 years, and he died at a ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying life. He breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. Abraham lived for 175 years, y'all. That's how old he was when he died. And the description of him dying is that he died at a ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying life. Now, that's the type of life that I want to be able to live. Long and satisfying. So it doesn't matter of the mistakes that you necessarily make. What matters is that he walked with God and he's considered righteous. And his life was satisfying and long. That means he got to enjoy the life that he lived. Now in verse 9, his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah near Mamre in the field of Ephron, son of Zohar the Hittite. This was the field Abraham had purchased from the Hittites and where he had buried his wife Sarah. So that's important because there's no detail that the Bible provides that's like something that you shouldn't be able to use. So we can use a description of the cave that he was buried in to be able to find it if we wanted to. And so this is referencing 2 chapters ago in chapter 23 when Abraham actually purchased this field. This field was not owned by the Hittites. I'm sorry, it was not owned by by Abraham or any of his descendants. It was purchased from the Hittites by Abraham. And this is the same field that 40 years later, just about, he was able to be buried in. So that still tells us of his status in that community, his respect in that community, and that is land that he purchased. Like this is owned land. It says, after Abraham's death, God blessed his son Isaac, who settled near Beer-lahai-roi in the Negev. So that Negev is essentially it's like south of, this is the area that mostly Abraham lived in and like camped in. The Negev would have been about south of it. This is the Sinai Peninsula, and this is Egypt over here. So this would have been like the Negev area somewhere right there. And so yeah, so now it's giving us information. It's confirming that hey, the blessing was passed from Abraham now to Isaac, because it's telling us that God blessed his son Isaac. All right. Now, Ishmael's descendants. We're going to continue reading through the chapter. This is the account of the family of Ishmael. That's the first son of Isaac, the oldest son. But the oldest son is not the one to get the promise, nor the birthright. The son of Abraham through Hagar. So it's giving you information so you can remember which person Ishmael was. Sarah's Egyptian servant. Here is a list by their names and clans of Ishmael's descendants. So each of these sons of Ishmael would have developed their own clan, which is like a large family. And then it would have grown into a tribe, because those people have children and they have children, they have children. So it grows into like a whole vicinity of people, which is a tribe. and tribes lead to nations. So the oldest was Nebaioth, followed by Kedar, Abdil, Mipsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jatur, Naphish, and Kadima. These 12 sons of Ishmael became the founders of 12 tribes named after them, listed according to the places they settled and camped. Now we have a clue. These sons became their names, right? They were founders of the tribes, but their names became the places that they settled and camped. So that should tell us map wise what we should be looking for. We should be looking for their names to be on a map. Now, here is the visual so you can see Ishmael, of course, is the son of Hagar and Abraham. At this point, Abraham has passed away, but Ishmael has all of these sons. All right. Now, look at those names of those sons. We had Tema. Here is Tema, right? I think we had, did we have Duma? Duma, yep. We had Duma. Here's Duma. We have Kedar, and Kedar is not on here. Kedar would have been considered a major region in this area. It's actually spelled with a Q in the Hebrew, so Qedar. So part of your homework would be to look up the map of Kedar. All you're going to notice is that everything is east of where Isaac's ancestors would have settled. So Kedar, I think, was right about this region or somewhere up in here. So verse 17 tells us Ishmael lived for 137 years. Then he breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. Now, it never says the same thing that Abraham said, and I just saw that. Then he breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. See how it just tells us the number of years and it says he breathed his last. Ishmael's life was very different from Abraham. Look at Abraham. Abraham said he lived for 175 years and he died at a ripe old age, having lived a long and satisfying life. Then it says he breathed his last and joined his ancestors in death. Ishmael doesn't say anything about living a long and satisfying life. That leads me to believe if it's not there, it didn't happen. So maybe his life was not satisfying. It might have been semi-long, but it wasn't as satisfying as it could have been. Ishmael's descendants occupied the region from Havilah to Shur, which is east of Egypt. Egypt is here. They would have occupied land east of Egypt. That's this direction, in the direction of Ashur. So you can go look up Havilah, Shur. These are regions, and Ashur to see where that is. And what you will notice is that this description of where they settled matches what it says on a map. There they lived in open hostility towards all their relatives. There they lived in open hostility. That means the descendants of Ishmael live in open hostility to all their relatives. That explains why it doesn't say that Ishmael lived a long and satisfying life, because he's living in hostility. Probably waking up most days being bitter and hateful and just not appreciative or just not happy in general. So open hostility. So what that's telling us is, okay, let's go back and review. Midian is a son of Keturah, not Ishmael's descendant. Duma would have been a descendant of Ishmael. Tema would have been a descendant of Ishmael. Dedan would have been a descendant of one of Keturah's sons. Sheba would have been a descendant of one of Keturah's sons. So that means that all the people who are occupying this area are living, they are all relatives of Ishmael, all living in open hostility. These people over here don't really get along with these people over here. They probably tolerate each other, but they don't really get along. Same thing up here. The people up here not getting along with the people over here. Tolerate each other, but they're not together. They're not united. So it's describing that they lived in open hostility. There it was very known. Now we get to learn about Esau and Jacob. And it says, this is the account of the family of Isaac, the son of Abraham. When Isaac was 40 years old, he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean, from Padan Aram, and the sister of Laban, the Aramean. So what this is giving us is insight into reminder of who Rebekah's family was. Now, last week we covered this, but just to recap you, Abraham has a brother. His brother is Nahor. Nahor has a son, Bethuel, who has a daughter, Rebecca, and a son named Laban. Abraham has a son named Isaac. So Isaac marries Rebecca, who is Abraham's niece. All right? Or great niece. So technically, Isaac marries his second, I don't know if you call that a second cousin, but basically a cousin through the family line because Abraham was like, "You're not marrying these Canaanite women." So he went and found him a wife and brought her back from his homeland, from his family lineage. So that's all in the family. Not what you would think as far as incest is concerned. They would never have grown up together. They actually were quite some years apart because it told us that Rebecca was old enough to be married, but she was still a virgin. She was unmarried. So she was definitely probably close to 20 years old at least. And it tells us right here that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebecca. So they had at least a 20-year difference. So different, almost generation and everything. Okay, so this is just giving us the recap of who Isaac is and who he married. So he married Rebecca. So that's here. Okay, now what we're going to understand is their children is what it's about to break down, Esau and Jacob. Now, here's what I want you to understand. Esau and Jacob were sons of Isaac, but they had other cousins here under Ishmael, and then they had other cousins over here um, under Keturah's descendants. Abraham means father of many. That's Hebrew. So remember, his name was changed from exalted father to father of many. Abraham. Abram meant exalted father. When God changed his name to Abraham, it means father of many. And it don't just mean many sons. What I'm seeing and understanding is that really, because of how this maps out, it's going to end up being many nations, not just sons. Yes, he does have a lot of sons, and then they begot a lot of sons, but these sons turn into nations. Esau becomes a nation, Jacob becomes a nation, Sheba is a nation, Dedan, Midian, all nations. Kedar is a nation, Duma, Tema. We've already established that these are like literal places on the map, even in later biblical times, which means that's how long that legacy is lasting in this whole Middle Eastern region. So let's learn about how Isaac and Rebekah had Jacob and Esau. It says that Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. The Lord answered Isaac's prayer, and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. But the two children struggled with each other in her womb. So she went to ask the Lord about it. Why is this happening to me? She asked. So let's stop here because Isaac pleads with the Lord. That means he is interceding on behalf of his wife with the Lord and asking for children because she's unable to conceive. It tells us that the Lord answered Isaac's prayer and Rebekah became pregnant with twins. Sometimes I think we do things out of order because in our modern times, it's very much so seen that, women are sort of these spiritual matriarchs of their family. And that is great. I think that we should be spiritual leaders for our children and for our families, and we should be examples. But this, with Isaac pleading, that's a whole nother level of leadership. That's the man being a leader. We are unable to conceive. And it's not just Rebekah coming in and praying. Isaac prayed, and the Lord answered Isaac's prayer. But then let's look and see how this spiritual relationship worked with the Lord. Because the two children struggle, they fighting in the womb. So then she went to ask. So that's Rebekah. She went to ask the Lord about it. And she's asking, why is this happening to me? So that's telling us right there, not only does the Lord communicate with the man, the Lord also communicates with the woman. There is no barrier to that relationship because of gender. There is no barrier. Rebecca is able to ask, and guess what? She also gets an answer. The Lord answers his prayer, and the Lord answers her request, her question. So the Lord told her, the sons in your womb will become two nations. I told you that. From the beginning, the two nations will be rivals. One nation will be stronger than the other, and your older son will serve your younger son. So that is explaining to her why there is such a struggle, because typically the older son is the one that gets the rights. What God is telling her in advance is actually it's going to be flipped to where your younger son is going to be the more superior one, and your older son will be the more inferior one. That is a dynamic that nobody really wants to accept, because you're the oldest child. You're supposed to be more responsible. You're supposed to be more this, more leadership, more all of these traits. And actually, it's the reverse for them. And so that is why they are struggling, and they are going to be rivals. And so that's foresight. So you mean to tell me that that's the way God designed it, to where they would be struggling in the womb and come out of the womb struggling? Like that's the way they were designed. So these are personalities that you can't even change if you tried. And in verse 24 it says, and when the time came to give birth, Rebecca discovered that she did indeed have twins. The first one was very red at birth and covered with thick hair like a fur coat. So they named him Esau. Esau meaning hair, a Hebrew word for hair. Then the other twin was born with his hand grasping Esau's heel. So they named him Jacob. Jacob is a Hebrew word that means heel, but it also means deceiver. So it could be a word used for either. Isaac was 60 years old when the twins were born. So how long did this contending for the faith, contending for the promise happen? Isaac pleaded with the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was unable to have children. That means they had to ask for children for 20 years before they actually got that promise fulfilled, that blessing fulfilled. Isaac knew and understand who his father was, and he knew that he was receiving this blessing. So Isaac did not let up on his prayers and his faith for 20 years so they could have children, because he knew that they are supposed to have descendants as numerous as the stars. So when you are experiencing some type of trial and it looks like your answer is not coming, think about Isaac and how he had to pray for his children for 20 years before the Lord answered the prayer. Now, many people speculate about why. Maybe there was a curse in their family lineage because there was these delayed pregnancies. We don't know. But all we know is for Abraham and Sarah, the Lord answered their prayer. For Isaac and Rebekah, the Lord answers their prayer. And that's who's supposed to answer it, is the Lord. So remember, told us in verse 23 that the Lord said that the sons in your womb will become two nations. So I wanted to show you that on this map that we're looking at today. This is Israel. Israel is Jacob. Edom is down here. Edom is Esau. What you will find out is that their names and references got changed. So God changed Jacob's name to Israel, and he changes Esau is also going to be referred to as Edom. And you will see that in the very next verse that we read. They are two nations, two rivals, two completely separate areas, and they couldn't even live with one another in the same area. So he got the south, he got the north, and that's how it ends up being for decades and generations to come. So let's learn how Esau sells out. Remember, Esau is supposed to be he's the older one, and he sells his birthright. So it says as the boys grew up, so they done got older, much older, Esau became a skillful hunter. He was an outdoorsman, but Jacob had a quiet temperament, preferring to stay at home. So Esau was a hunter. Jacob was a homebody. He probably tended the sheep, took care of animals, did things in the house, but Jacob knew how to cook. Why did he know how to cook? Because he hung out with his mama, and Rebecca taught him how to cook. It tells us that Isaac loved Esau because he enjoyed eating the wild game Esau brought home, but Rebecca loved Jacob. So I know people are not supposed to have favorites, but obviously it's telling you that that Rebecca and Isaac both had favorites. One day, when Jacob was cooking some stew, so he was cooking, Esau arrived from the wilderness exhausted and hungry. Esau says to Jacob, I'm starved. Give me some of that stew. This is how Esau got his other name, that red stew, excuse me. This is how Esau got his other name, Edom, which means red. So let's go back to the map. Edom here means red. Why is it Edom on the map? Because that's Esau's nickname, and it means red because he wanted some red stew. So he, from this point forward, he is known as Edom because look at what he does with this stew. He wants this red stew. So Jacob said, okay, but trade me your rights as the firstborn son. Here's Esau. Look, I'm dying of starvation. What good is my birthright to me now? So you see how he is worried about his stomach and his flesh, and he's concerned with how hungry he is, and he's willing to give up a birthright. Now, some people would think, oh, Jacob is wrong for even asking for it. Well, we already know that they're supposed to be a rival. We already know that the younger would usurp the older. How are we supposed to think that that's going to happen? It just don't happen by chance. Obviously, Jacob is trying to work his way in here. Look at what kind of leader Esau is being, the oldest, and look how he's doing with his birthright. He's like, what good is my birthright if I'm starving? He's not worried about his inheritance in the future. He's worried about the present right now. So how many of us sacrifice what we have for the future because we are so concerned with right now, and right now this moment is going to pass? But Jacob said, first, you must swear that your birthright is mine. So Esau swore an oath, thereby selling all his rights as the firstborn to his brother Jacob. This is how big of a deal this is, y'all. Birthright is your legal right. You get a double portion of the inheritance. Legally, as the firstborn, you get, so that's why the oldest is always this big deal, because the oldest gets more. Because they have more responsibility, I suppose, something related to that. This is a legal birthright. He is legally giving away. That's why Jacob made him swear, because you just can't say it in a passing way. Like, no, this has to be a formal thing that's done. So he sold his birthrights in exchange for some stupid soup. So after he swore, Jacob gave. Because Jacob said, well, if you swear to do this, then I'm going to give it to you. So once Esau swore, then Jacob gave Esau some bread and lentil stew. Esau ate the meal, then got up and left. So he done let the whole moment pass. He's eating. He's still so concerned with his flesh that he's not even thinking about what he just swore to do. Therefore, it says he showed contempt for his rights as the firstborn. Disrespect, disregard, disdain. What y'all want Jacob to do? Esau doesn't care about being a leader. Esau does not care about being the firstborn son and having responsibilities and what he's supposed to be able to do with that. He doesn't care. So why should anybody else care? So that is the end of chapter 25, and that is how we get to the point where Esau then gave up his birthright. Now he still has, there's a birthright and there's a blessing. He sold his birthright to his younger brother, but he still has a blessing. Next week we get to learn how that blessing unfolded, and learn some more about Esau and Jacob's character here. So that is Abraham's legacy. So we are now three separate children, and three separate groups of children, I should say, and now we understand how their legacy played out. And what I need us to understand is that whole area in the Middle East that I showed you in that map, that is all Abraham's descendants. Gideon, Edom, Israel, Tema, Dedan, Sheba, the Arabian Peninsula over to the Middle East is full of Abraham's descendants. Up to Iraq is still full of Abraham's family, because that's where his original family had relocated to. So that whole region literally is Abraham's descendants. And that whole region is still fighting each other today, really, because there's one superior, there's one son of the promise, and they're in hostility. And so I just think that that is so interesting. And so now I wanted to provide some biblical context, historical context as to how we got to where we are today, based on what was going on with Abraham back then and the promises that God gave to different groups and what was assigned to different people in all great nations. So that is your lesson for today, Abraham's legacy. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, drop them in the comments and we'll get to them.